Starting. Okay. We are live. So everybody's joining. This is part of the community that helps fuel the channel. We've been starting to experiment around with like how to bring together people live just to see where that kind of takes us. And we're experimenting a lot. So we got a lot of folks in here. I want to have this as just like an open milieu. We just like discuss and we go. We're going to start with maybe just like a kickoff though with Vicci talking about generativity. I've had her at a conference in the past, ChatCon that we do. And I've also been able to explore just kind of luckily when I was over with Megan Marie Miller at one of her centers that she works with in Dubai with NEPA, and NEPA like laid out the curriculum and I was like, holy cow, there's a lot that goes into this. And so from going around and seeing you, Vicci, at different events like the Precision Teaching Conference and stuff like that, to seeing that, I was like, this is something that's really cool. So we had you come out. It's awesome. I think there's some really good words that you have around generativity. So real quick, can you tell everybody like a little bit of what you do and then we'll jump into your slides. Is that cool?
Yes. I work in California in the Monterey Bay area, Santa Cruz, so on. So I kind of live in heaven. So I'm pretty lucky. But Dr. Kent Johnson, exposed me to the language associated with generativity. However, B.F. Skinner really said in one of his books many years ago, which I think is really important, said it was really probably the most important thing that behavior analysts can do is to make sure that the students or learners or adults or whatever you want to label them as acquire the repertoires to allow them to learn in novel circumstances. And that really had a major effect on me many years ago, but I did not know about generativity. So I'm hoping today, if you haven't been exposed to it, I can give you just some basic concepts that will help you understand it, because it's really unbelievably important. Does anybody on our chat have any exposure to generativity?
Not enough.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably not where it should be at. Correct.
And I'd say it's a weak area of my practical like hands-on skill set too. Only through the PT community and kind of seeing y'all present.
Okay. So what I did today was I sent Ryan just a few slides from what I did at ChatCon, Ryan. So
you ready for them?
Yeah, I'm ready for them.
All right. They should be there, yeah?
Can everybody see it now?
Yes.
So when you look at a tree, so to speak, it kind of displays what we mean by generativity. You may start out with one or two branches, but then it keeps growing. More and more branches break off from other branches. And it's like Kent talks about it as in terms of certain behaviors or certain repertoires combine and recombine to produce a whole new set of behaviors that may look very different from the original behaviors that combine. Are you following me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so can we go to the next slide? So I learned very clearly where does new behavior come from? And I was trained many years ago, and unfortunately, it wasn't based on Skinner's work, but I'm a BCBA, fortunately. I learned to read Skinner, so I'm pretty radical. And it became quite clear that I had to determine what repertoires are most important for an individual to learn. So I really focus on Skinner's verbal operants and nonverbal operants, but I added many more. I use teacher-friendly language, so I could not just use speaker and listener. I had to use talker, observer, problem solver, so forth and so on repertoires. There's about 7 of them, and I'm not going to go into detail about those. It's probably stuff you're familiar with. So next slide, Brian. Here's the interesting part for me when I learned this from Kent. It's the study of the conditions that occasion novel behavior and complex behavior for free. In other words, you do not have to explicitly train everything that you want them to be able to do. But you've got to make sure they have the core repertoires that will combine and recombine to deal with the new circumstances. Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Are you on the one with the sight reading?
Yep.
I
Or
can't-
sorry, where it says the study of the conditions that occasion novel behavior and complex behavior for free.
Go to the next slide.
All right.
So if you try to teach sight words, it's not a generative approach. They won't combine and recombine to make certain words, other words that look different in novel circumstances. However, if you go to the next slide, Brian, if you use head sprout and you're teaching decoding skills and the process of blending, it's a generative approach to teaching reading. So can you see the difference in that?
Mm-hmm.
It's very different. Like Janet Twyman and Steichletter, and I can't remember who else was involved, wrote a paper where they taught a few individual letter sounds, but then they combined those letter sounds. In other words, they engineered the environment. And so, for instance, if they learned the sound for C and the sound for L, then they could show them that combination and say to them, I bet you can sound this out, because they had learned the process of sounding out. And so the children, without being taught, could say that blend. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you get free behavior. But you
Okay.
have to make sure that you set the occasion for it by teaching them the sounding out kind of behavior. They were also good participators. They had developed that repertoire. All right. So let's go to the next slide.
All right.
So, I'm sorry.
Generativity conditions.
Yes. So application is one of the generativity conditions. Kent prefers to talk about it as application than generalization because generalization is confusing. All right, so read this definition of it. The learner engages in the same performance that was previously taught but reinforced under new circumstances. So he might have learned something in the classroom, but he could do it in the lunchroom. That's a form of generative responding, but it's just application of what he had already learned. And see how you want to think generalization right away?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is Kent refers to it as application. Can we go to the next slide? The exciting form to get the new behavior is called adduction or contingency adduction. The repertoires that are in strength are combined by new and very different conditions to form new behavior that looks and sounds very differently. Not only do you get the new behavior, but you get it under novel conditions. All right, and I'm going to show you some examples. This is the last slide. All right, can you read this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So Beth Lang and Kent Johnson worked on this together. Well, actually, Beth did it based on what she had learned from Kent. And so this is really fairly simplistic. I'm going to move something over so I can even read it so I don't mislead you. So just give me a second. And can everyone read it?
Yes.
You all have young eyes. I don't. Okay. So you're looking at application. and Beth provided 3 different examples. And this is all in relationship to the use of a spoon. All right, so you have a context application. All right, so you use a spoon at a table. I can't even read it myself. And on a couch. So in other words, you use it in different contexts. However, it says to use the spoon to perform the same behavior in either context. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a concept application. So you're using a cooking spoon and a teaspoon, but I can't read it. I'm sorry. Can someone else read it for me? Oh, there, I got it. So let me start over. The concept application, can you tack terms of events with a set of critical features? In other words, cooking spoon and teaspoon both occasion the word spoon. So a child learns that this is a cooking spoon, this is a teaspoon, and they can do it across different conditions. But it's novel conditions, but it's the same behavior. They're saying the word spoon. Then there's a principle and a rule. I'm just going to let you read it.
Okay.
So can you apply principles and rules in novel situations? So the example is use a soup spoon for soup and a long spoon for ice cream sundaes.
Yeah. So in other words, you know the rule. I
Okay.
can do this in this circumstance, so forth and so on. All right. Now, when you move to contingency adduction, it's new behavior under new conditions, new stimuli. So you look at the idea of a context adduction.
So can you recombine mastered skills to solve a new problem? An example being use a spoon to get a crumb that fell under the hot burner.
So it's a whole new context. Whole new context. I thought they did a wonderful job with this. Then they did behavior reduction.
Which is, can you put behaviors together to form a new behavior? Combining whisking and a spoon holding to whip heavy cream with a spoon when no whisk.
Yeah, whole new behavior. For instance, a colleague of mine lives in Pennsylvania, and she had no electricity available to her. So she had to engage in some novel behavior under those novel circumstances to feed her family. And she took out an old-time can opener, that's pointed on one end and flips a bottle cap on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
And she used that to open up the tuna can. Have you guys ever been involved in something like that? It's a whole new behavior in new circumstances. So that's what you always have to think about. So just to give you that context, and to be honest with you, I worry about the fact that we explicitly teach everything that our learners are expected to know to do, to become skilled at, rather than teaching certain behaviors that will combine and recombine so that they can learn learn more independently is what I want to say.
Yeah.
It's real important to do that. It's like we baby them. We don't think they can really learn to do something on their own.
They're prompt dependent.
Totally prompt dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother subject. Prompt dependency. All right. So that's about as much as I can start a conversation with, Brian.
What do y'all think?
Yeah, it's evident in everyday application of ABA and fieldwork that this is needed. It would be a lot more time efficient too.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think it's also, it's part of it is that I think it's very reinforcing for the implementers, because when we teach it in the way that, you know, you're saying we should move away from, it's really pretty graphs. You know, like I think it's very reinforcing for the implementer to do it in that way.
Well, for years, before I knew about the terminology of generativity, I would hear from parents, "Oh my God, he did this today. I didn't teach him. Did you teach him?" You know, it's that parents just are blown away when they learn something new, as we are, you know, but I didn't know what to call it.
Sometimes having the experience that the learner is kind of outpacing your instruction, kind of you're back
Yes.
here and they're, you know, they're already applying it in ways that you hadn't explicitly taught yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you have to
It's-
listen to that and be able to program differently when you see that happening.
Right. Exactly. It's actually pretty fortuitous that we're talking about this, because the book I have next to me on the table is
Kent's book.
Ken's book on generative instruction, and I just started reading it just a few days ago, so this is fresh in my mind. So I think the universe is telling me I need to be paying attention to generative instruction. But it's something I've been just thinking about a lot more, just the idea of if you teach every skill individually, you're going to reach capacity just doing maintenance at a certain point, and being strategic about, you know, planning and teaching steps efficiently so that they can recombine them and solve new problems and reach that next level.
Yeah, and the tricky part about it, we as behavior analysts have a tendency to not recognize other evidence-based practices. If you're not using a scoped and sequenced curriculum to teach a lot of things, and well, I don't have to say what kind of trouble you'll get into. I spent 8 years writing the curricula because I found out that I could not just arrange contingencies. And I could not keep using the same materials, so forth and so on. And so I went up and spent a whole day with Engelman and learned about language for learning and reading mastery. And I learned that he could not develop a curricula to get kids ready for language for learning. So I took on that challenge and did it for 8 years. And it makes a huge difference to get kids ready for language for learning. And if you haven't looked at those DI curricula, I encourage you to do that. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I actually just last week was talking to a parent, and you know, it's a preteen age girl who can type, but we discovered can't actually read. And you know, mom was kind of like, "Oh, I just want to go put labels of items on everything so she can just learn everything." And I was like, "Well, she's just going to be memorizing that stuff. Like, you need to take a few steps back and teach some skills that she can then have the generative learning." So
yeah, and I think it was Engelman who first showed that if you teach, I think it's 41 or 44 letter sounds, I can't remember exactly, and you teach the process of sound it out, say it fast, they'll learn to decode thousands of words over a 1 year period. 1 year, you know, and I've seen the magic of it. I mean, it's really amazing. But just one more point, the whole thing about generativity is that whatever skills you teach, whatever competencies they have, must be fluent. So this is where precision teaching comes in place. Because if they're not fluent, they won't recombine. So we can't just rely on Skinner. We have to rely on Engelman and Ogden. All three practices, we have to be fluent in ourselves for it really to work. And Kent will talk about the importance of fluent behavior.
Ken Johnson, this is Morningside Academy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, why does this sound so familiar?
Yes. You'll see him in Chicago.
Okay.
So if you can attend, do it.
Just come hang out. Come hang out at the social hour.
I know. It's in a really good area. It's a fun area where the conference is. Okay. So Vicki, with what you have learned, so has this primarily been used with children within your application of it, or have you worked on it like with teenagers?
I first
Older?
worked on it with adults who moved out of a state hospital, and then I got hired on a Friday, and they ended up in my classroom on a Monday.
Can you
Literally,
can you talk more
23,
about that?
23 to 68 years old.
Yeah, so I just like really briefly, I worked down in Southern Illinois because there was a state-funded hospital that shut down on a Friday, and the individuals needed somewhere to go on a Monday.
Right.
And it was a lot of urgency placement. But yeah, can you talk a little bit more on what it was like working with adults?
I knew nothing.
Okay.
I knew how to play. I had in my car a football and golf clubs. And I
Okay.
decided to not bring out my golf clubs, fortunately.
Okay.
And I was there by myself. And
Okay.
we played in the park passing football a lot, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And all the school district gave me was a piece of paper, a stack of paper and 12 pencils. That's all I had to work with.
Okay.
But he invited me that if they ever became competent enough, they could come up to adult ed and take adult classes. So that's where I started to develop what I call the competent learner model. I had to prepare them to be educated enough to be able to learn in adult ed classes.
Selena, did I see you comment in the last few hours or something like that on something about adults? Like, is that an area of passion for you?
Well, so I work with adults. In the beginning, I worked with children who have autism in classroom, daycare, home settings. It's a wonderful field. I applaud each and every one of behavior analysts who do that. What really was incompatible with me was the parents and the parent teacher and the continued teaching that needed to occur when the behavior analyst wasn't there. So then I moved to adults just to see what is it like once the little ones grow up. And it's this whole other world that is just dying for care and looking for strategic measures. We really don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need better application, better funding. It's state specific too. So I'm in the state of Illinois. From what I've experienced and from what I've heard, we have some of the better funding, but it's still very, very difficult and problematic.
Yeah, there's a lot of my understanding is a lot of people worked in state institutions early on in this 50s, 60s, 70s and continued there. I had a taste of those when I was leaving undergrad and through graduate school, those sort of state experiences. So I started, two thoughts here. First of all, adults were the first population I worked with, and I didn't realize it at the time, but then working with the children younger ages later on, I realized the sense of urgency of how, what you're working on is so crucial to work as fast as not fast, throw in all the hours and kill yourself, right? But it's work as efficiently and smart as you can when helping sort of those younger ages. But then the state facility also, it was the first time that I saw someone shackled with their ankles and their waist and two staff and just unreal situations, unreal situations in those sort of places. I wish I wish there was a bit of a perspective taking activity for all analysts, in physical therapy, clinical rounds. You have to usually visit, I think it's mandatory, you visit 4 different types of settings, whether there's outpatient, inpatient, and those sort of things. And it would be so beneficial for our field to expect some more experience, not only adults, but those state facilities too.
Yeah, I recall you and Dimitri talking a lot about on this, just the whole model that we have of our internships and how it would be beneficial if we followed that of a medical model. I agree completely. I think it would be great for those who want to work with little ones to better understand, some of the skill sets that you teach them, that may be all that they ever get properly taught to them, unfortunately, due to funding. So yeah, I'm really intrigued on how this can be applied for the adults in an adult setting. It sounds efficient. It sounds effective. So yeah, looking at it
Well,
that way.
Yeah,
What-
we use my. I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone?
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, it sounds like our education and training could use some generative learning.
Yeah, and I've applied the model to the staff that I train.
How
So-
did that go? Yeah, what did that look like?
Oh, I have people with high school diplomas that are more competent than BCBAs, to be honest with you.
I have a question for you, Vicki. I mean, I think I was fortunate enough to cut my teeth in ABA at Tucci Learning Solutions, by the way.
Well, hello.
Hello there. Yeah, but I was just gonna say I was fortunate that I cut my teeth on the CLM, so I got a lot of exposure, of course, to the idea of teaching to fluency. And I'm working with a supervisee right now, and we're doing we're teaching purchasing skills for a young adult with Down syndrome, and she's having a lot of trouble with generalizing. And I told my supervisee, like, I think that she's not fluent in these these counting skills and these
Yes.
dollaring up skills. And when I said that, she didn't know what fluency was. And
Oh
this is
yeah,
someone
that's not uncommon.
with a master's in ABA. And of course, when I explained it to her, nobody has a problem with the idea of fluency. It makes total sense, and that's what we're trying to do. But what do you see as the biggest barrier to getting more training and exposure to fluency-based instruction in ABA programs, or just in the field?
You go to the Precision Teaching Conference. I mean, it's just, I don't know of any other conference that really provides that sort of training. And you go to Engelman's conference if you want to learn about direct instruction. I mean, I feel sorry for behavior analysts that keep having to write behavioral programs, when in reality they should be using well-designed curricula.
What is Engelman's conference? What is that? What do you mean?
It's the direct instruction conference. It's usually in July in Oregon.
I'll work on finding a link for y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And oftentimes you can buy used curricula because people buy it and aren't trained to use it. And Engelman warned me about that. He told me to never sell anything I do off the shelf, that you want to work for competency-based training. That's what you want to work toward, to make sure that they can apply whatever they've learned. So, because everything got shelved at Engelman all these years, all of the things that people bought because they didn't know how to use it. Sounds crazy, but that's the reality of what he went. And he just died recently, so.
Yeah. I will share the link in the comment section.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
So kind of so the comment that I had listed on one of your YouTube videos was about behavior data tracking and just not reinventing that wheel, and how I can't remember the woman that you did the interview with.
It was Carrie Milico. She's a precision teacher.
Yeah, precision teaching. And just how we don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to data tracking. And I just commented on that just to please keep adults in mind as well, because adults have such a also long history of data collection, but it just gets shelved. Yeah, it doesn't really get reviewed as what it should be. And it sounds like the program work that could be applied, like if you're working on like a money skills or some sort of social skills, you could have a kind of like a, I don't want to say preset, but you could have like an effective program for that skill set versus continuously rewriting the same behavior plan, but maybe altering it a little bit. I mean, it sounds like that's kind of what this would be effectively doing. Sorry.
No, you're good. So my understanding is that what Vicci had been working on, and people that focus on this generativity aspect are, yes, they're creating something that's basically like modular, but it's written such that you're not having to rewrite every damn thing over and over and over again. You have like an actual real curricula. So for example, like most of the things on the shelves for early intervention and autism language, like whether you take the ABLA, even the
Abel's.
ABLS R, VBMAP, PEAK, they are like starting points, but they're not like scoped
They're
out.
assessments.
Yeah, they're assessments,
Right.
and they're not scoped out curricula. Like there is no scope and sequence there. There's no instructional design logic built into that. And even if they're watch at some point, they're like, yo, whoa, like it's not there. It's not the true instructional design scope and sequence. Not that they're not valid or like useful in their own right for what they do. But I look at these two things as like very separate areas of practice.
Okay.
And like tools that are on the market. Like this is very like Vicki was saying, like it's not off the shelf. You can go buy and use it because we know that breaks down, right? And that's why people struggle when it comes to like there was a VB map piece that was put out on the early echoic skills portion. I can't remember exactly what that thing's called. I used to use that thing all the time for a quick assessment on like echoic skills, and they put out a piece like in the last 3 months saying, hey, we understand that people have been teaching off of this. It's not made for that. And that was like 10 or 15 years after it was made. And like those sort of errors shouldn't be being committed in our field. And it's not the fault of the practitioner trying to figure out how to implement and help their students. It's not the fault of the person writing it per se, that designed it for a certain thing. It's the fact that our culture is looking for these like ready-made solutions. So,
Okay.
The thing is like we need like I feel like we're in a time where there's a lot of people looking for how do I find what works and how do I implement something that works very well. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's on the market isn't being it wasn't designed for, and it's not understood that those things have a very small scope of what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Right.
And people quickly extend them beyond that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I'm actually working with Dr. Dixon right now from PEAK on application of the PEAK assessment, finding the skill set that they're deficient in, and now we're working towards teaching it. But that's kind of like where we're encountering some issues is like the application, the teaching process of it, because PEAK got us here, but now we're figuring out how to keep going with the learning process or teaching.
And I look at these as like different camps, different foundations. They all of it's labeled behavior analysis, but they're coming from different ways. So the PEAK shows no evidence of like the generativity component or the fluency component like built into it, and that's not a judgment toward how those like who decided what and why they went with what they went with. But I look at it for a behavior analyst, and especially someone trying to understand like all the stuff out there. Like this is a different pillar of like content that's out there. That generativity book that I think it was Ben, you showed it, right? Yeah, Ben held up. It's a different area that's not known as much, and partially that's because of what Vicki was talking about, how they don't put it up on a shelf to where you can go buy that stuff. Like because they know that stuff gets watered down and doesn't hit the intended outcomes of what they're going for.
Got it.
See, I use PSI. Personalized systems of instruction. In other words, I make sure that a coach makes sure that an individual, when they go through my online units, I teach my staff to formulate, deliver, and monitor programming. But I have those 3 tracks, then have a unit. I have 17 units developed already, and I have 6 more to release that I'm finishing up. So in order to use my curriculum, you have to go through those units. Engelman had training like that, but it was all paper version. When I met with him, I met with him before any of you were born. So, so the point is, when Engelman talks about curriculum, there's 3 criteria. You have to have scripted formats. You have to have a scope and sequence of related tasks. And there has to be cumulative review built in. And that doesn't have anything to do with fluency. Ogden, that's a whole nother
And you can see,
evidence-based practice.
and you can see in like the traditional EIBI settings, like working with kids with autism and such, like people try to do that, but it's not structured. I think that's the biggest difference there. Is like those things aren't structured. Like you will see components of your, what'd you say, your curricular review, your review, cumulative review. Your
Right.
cumulative review, you'll see when people have like their mastered binder and they're supposed to like bring these things back every couple, weeks or whatever. But the way I've understood these is there's much more deliberate action of like building a system that does that and make sure that it actually achieves everything, as opposed to people that are not trained in like how important it is to do those sort of things. So there's these like fraction, and the majority is over here, whereas there's a small minority that's being extremely effective over here. And the difference is like scalability versus I would say scalability versus quantity is like valued a little bit differently in those communities. Sorry to label if anyone feels that way, but like,
No.
I mean, there's a reason, like there's a lot of selling of like tools over here, and there's
Yes.
a lot of like, let's work hands-on over here. And there's a difference in the number there. And I'm not saying, I think them working together, they could actually like be a lot more effective, but they're very separate camps. The Precision Teaching Conference is an extremely different feel than any ABI or anything Calava, any of those, because of that like difference in those core values.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list of conferences to attend.
Absolutely.
It's
Really soon.
good old warm St. Pete this year down in Florida.
Yeah, I'm not able to go. We just got invited to present at a conference in Scotland. You should look into it. It's called the Global Implementation Conference. All right. There's actually a science of implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So how you scale up. So for instance, my work is all over the state of Pennsylvania. It's been in place for over a decade in public schools. And now the last 5 years, it's been going down the entire left side of the state of Virginia.
Wow.
So you've got to scale up. And public schools are the hardest place to work in. But I'm an idiot. I like to do hard things. So it's amazing to walk in and see someone with a high school diploma actually teach and teach very effectively and work with very difficult students in their environments. It's just, I encourage you to visit. I'm trying to get Ryan to find some time to go into Virginia because I think it would blow him away.
Yes.
So, and I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging. I've just been fortunate enough to work with the masters. Except for Ogden. Ken is my replacement for Ogden Lindsay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to check it out. It's on my list.
Oh, I know. I'm not giving you a hard time.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Okay, give him a hard time.
There's too many going around all over the place. Megan.
Vicci, I was just going to say, Vicci, where do you recommend visiting?
Well, for number one, I'd go to the CLM Center of Excellence. So our work is now, the CLM is being taught at Clarion University. You can become a BCBA concurrently if you already have your BA. And it just started this year. And people can become a certified coach and use the tools, have the ability. So I encourage you to go there and look at what's going on.
Great.
And you become a certified coach in
The CLM.
Okay.
The competent learner model. Ben, did you ever get that far along in the course?
I was actually just about to say one of the regrets I have is I left maybe one or two modules short of getting my coaching certification.
Well, I'll give you access for free.
Yeah, we should chat about that.
Yeah, if you were that far along. But you got to realize I got more units coming out. Like I'm releasing shortly 3 units, basic units on fluency. Precision teaching units, very, very basic.
That would be great. I'll have to make sure I can track down my on my documentation about it because I saved it for years afterwards. I know that.
Did you do it online or did you do it on the CDs?
I did it online.
Well, then
but
we
not on
should have a
CDs.
record of that. Just
Oh, great. Yeah, it would
yeah,
have been
you know our
2010,
email address.
2011.
vtucci@tuccionline.com.
Yeah,
Yeah, just write me then. I'm sorry to.
fantastic.
No, you're good. Yeah, there's just Vicky's one of the probably the only person that's really like developing solutions around this, right? Is there anyone else?
Not that I know of.
You got the no one's as crazy as you.
No,
That's
no,
part
no
of it.
one. Well, actually, part of the reason I did it, I worked in public schools every day for eight hours a day, and I got bored with saying the same things. So I wrote a curriculum, but then I had to write a course of study to teach people to use the curriculum because they weren't trained. BCBAs weren't being trained to use curriculum.
Yeah.
So anyway, go to the CLM Center of Excellence if you're interested. And Ben, you're lucky. You already got started, so I'll give it to you.
And this is in.
You have them
This
all
is-
over the place, yeah?
What?
Where where are some of these physical locations if somebody at some point wanted to swing by?
Well, in the United States, it's just in Virginia and PA. We're going into Southern California. Probably we're negotiating with Orange County and the Pasadena School District, and we're negotiating with China now and Bulgaria. We're in UAE, both Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Paris. I had to spend a horrible 3 months in Paris, as you can imagine.
Oh my god! Yeah, terrible.
That sounds awful. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it really was rough. So, anyway,
Okay, so
The
nothing in the
unfortunate-
Midwest yet.
the unfortunate part about it is people don't realize how long it takes to learn all this stuff because it goes way beyond ABA.
Okay.
That's the part and I've had BCBAs quit because their implementers knew more than they did.
What are some of those areas? So behavior analysis is one. Is like the
Precision
implementation?
teaching.
Okay.
Precision teaching and direct instruction. Like Engelman has a fabulous book on how to write instruction. It's a very old text called
That black book?
Theory
Yeah.
of Instruction. And Kent will teach you about precision teaching. In fact, Kathy Watkins said they should have called it precision measurement.
Yeah.
See, precision teachers use curricula. Like you should like I'm having a big workshop with Elizabeth Houghton. She's a precision teacher and she's developed her own curricula. So that's another person. She probably charges way less than Engelman's people do. I work with the most naive learners who have no language skills in most cases, horrible participators in instructional conditions.
Okay.
I get them ready for language for learning.
Who was Theory of Instruction by the book?
Siegfried Engelmann.
That book is a
Engelman.
freaking beast. Oh my god.
It is a beast.
We'll make a study group.
Oh my
right here.
gosh.
It's well
Holy
worth
shit.
it.
You need like a study year for that thing.
Well, that's okay. We could. I mean, one step at a time.
It's really worth it.
We
It
gotta get
is.
there
I'm not
eventually,
trying
right?
to. I'm not trying to say it's not worth it.
I mean, yeah. The alternative is not learning, so that's not really.
Yeah, here we go. I remember buying this thing. I never made it through. It's like
boy.
it's massive.
Quitter.
Quitter, yeah. Call me on it.
Actually,
It's like a small encyclopedia
Oh wow.
on how to design any sort of instruction, right?
anything.
Yeah, I mean it's
There's four categories.
It's 400 pages. It looks ridiculous, but I am hitting it a little harder than it needs to.
I have a whole unit on it, just in terms of two of them: how to teach verbal associations, which are essentially interverbals, and how to teach concepts.
Okay.
There's, tax, so forth and so on. And we're getting ready through the Salem Center of Excellence to add webinars to teach this subject matter.
Nice.
It
So,
doesn't mean you would be, quote, competent, because we're not going to see if you can apply it, but you would be able to acquire some knowledge.
just so I'll give you a couple of the chapters that are in here, so you'll have an idea. There's it starts with the overview of strategies, like what is a knowledge system, theoretical foundations, and such. But they literally have chapters on like nouns. There's a chapter on hierarchical class programs. There's one on deriving. There's one on worksheet items. There's one on prompting examples. One on covertization. One on expanded change. Like I'm just kind of picking randomly out of here, but there's 31 chapters and it's very, very specific, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
You learn how to teach rules. Is the third category, and I forget what the fourth is. My students weren't sophisticated enough yet to learn it, so I didn't write that part in my unit.
Okay. Well, Vicci, I actually unfortunately need to get going, but thank you very much for all this information, and there's a lot that I will need to be looking into. And thanks, Ryan.
Well, thank Ryan because he beat me up to make sure I present it.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for putting these together and all the content you're putting out there.
And thanks for all your support. I mean, it's the reason I get to keep doing these things. So
yeah, have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.
We had Megan Miller's chiming in. She's somewhere in Europe right now. She was chiming in on the comments section and was hitting me a little bit on the generativity component. She's saying that stuff's really built into Peak. It just looks different. And so I agreed with her. Like it is, I think both are going for the same thing. It's talked about differently for sure. And she was asking if she showed the tree. She likes the tree metaphor that you used in that first slide.
Just have to pay me a quarter.
Was there anything else that was on anyone's mind as we were like chatting or?
I was curious, Vicci, what your thoughts are on how important scripted delivery of instruction really is.
Well, Engelman was really, it was very important what he calls, and I use the term naive learners, the kids that really don't have the basic repertoires. He was really clear you don't want to confuse the kids. And in most cases, like with my colleagues, there may be 3 or 4 different staff that are serving that child in a given week. And so that's why it's so important that you have the scripted formats. So nobody is making up how they're going to teach something. It's really critical that you don't do that. So, I mean, something as simple as teaching colors or teaching concept bigger, is Engelman has very specific formats developed for teaching the concept of bigger.
There's and there's so many opportunities for human error. Ben, you work with like a totally different clientele, and I'm assuming that there's like very easy ways that you can do something wrong and just like damage a therapeutic relationship, right?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, majority of the work I do is with anxiety disorders and OCD. I don't do scripted, delivery of instruction in that context, but I would say that that knowing how to do what's called exposure therapy is really important. And one of the most important things is that there isn't things that the learner or the client is doing to undo the experience. So for instance, someone who's learning to, or has a contamination fear that if they touch this doorknob, they might get sick. A lot of the things that we're doing is we're working through a fear hierarchy or a task analysis of touching things progressively closer to the thing that they're afraid to touch. But then the second part is not washing your hands long enough to see that you don't get sick, and also making sure that there isn't any covert behavior that you're doing to make yourself feel safe, kind of artificially, like self-reassurance. And so that's the response prevention piece. Treatment for OCD is exposure plus response prevention. And a lot of times folks that haven't had good training in exposure and response prevention therapy just do exposure, and then the client is doing all of their unhelpful compulsions or safety behaviors, and it's basically just practicing having OCD, right? Let's scare you and challenge you and have you not learn anything about it because you're undoing it. So I think that's the most important thing to pay attention to, that you're really looking at all of the different topographies of compulsions. And sometimes it's as simple as they're saying to themselves, it's going to be okay because I know blah, blah, blah. And if you don't take care of that, you're often stuck in treatment and you don't know why.
I feel like all these things are like they're like algorithmic. Like you can figure they're all algorithmic. Like you can figure them like they all should be theoretically like understandable, right, from a BA lens, to where you could no matter what it is, like you could script it. It just goes faster for some skill sets than others, is how I kind of think of it, you know? Is that making sense?
Yeah,
like,
and I think that it's the other part about it is that if you wouldn't want to necessarily script it in exposure therapy, because part of programming for generalization is kind of keeping things fresh and not getting used to doing things the same way.
For sure. But like that, I look at that as like a variable, right? Like there's a variable in your algorithm that like does those sort of things. And I feel like the direct instruction, some of those stuff, like arithmetic and stuff, it's like kind of like, hey, we figured these out, but there's no reason that we can't start to understand those more. Like that's why advertising and Facebook and these sort of companies like keep around, because they're like slowly getting closer, right, to figuring out what are those really complex skill sets that like and how do we influence that sort of behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's some people doing that in the exposure therapy world, like Michelle Krask, who does a lot of it's essentially EAB work around what kind of exposure exercises help people maintain the gains and not have a return of their fear.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do, their finding is kind of keeping the context sort of random, doing something to explicitly violate someone's expectancy. You're expecting this horrible thing to happen. Let's kind of almost set up an experiment, try it, and then review afterwards to kind of stamp in that learning. So I think there are definitely some steps being made there.
Stuff's really fascinating. I feel like for behavior analysis to like really make a big impact, like if you got to figure out how to get it in a way to which it can be implemented without error, whether that's with technology or through training. Like we started really looking at those things with program instruction and such, but it seems it kind of got off the beaten path, or it got off the off of our priority list as a result of like the funding streams and needs and such.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, and a lot of times we're fighting against the context that we're kind of boxed into doing it. I mean, since I do a lot in a lot of therapy work in an office setting, I'm often constrained by, we practice it in the office, but I have to, do my best that I'm training the client and and training the parents on how to practice outside the home, but I'm not always getting the chance, and actually rarely do get the chance, to go in the home and teach it in that context. And so I think you can do a lot of tinkering in a laboratory setting, or do translational work and really try to dial it in. But you also have to accept the reality that there may not be the opportunities or the funding or even just the habits people have developed to actually do it that way. And it's something I'm still trying to work out. Is the solution something in the middle? Is the solution a change in culture? Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if anyone does. Oh man.
Oh,
Any
man
other-
is right.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? We got a few minutes till we got to close down.
Vicki, how come you don't have more in the Bay Area?
it
And I asked because I live in the Bay Area. So
renting office. Well, we're in San Jose,
how are you?
so that's almost the Bay Area. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's part of the Bay. I grew up
Yeah.
in San Jose. My parents still live there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're up there. By the way, when I worked in a state hospital for 3 years. And it was the very reason I've done the work I've done, because I swore I'd never want another individual to end up in a state institution.
They're insane. They're so
Oh.
freaking crazy.
I had to move my desk to a seclusion room, Ryan, so they would stop throwing people naked into a seclusion room on a winter day,
Yeah.
because they never knew when I was going to be in that area. That's how bad it was in West Virginia. Wow. It was the second hospital improvement project. So that's when I learned about behavior analysis.
Yeah. They're nuts. That could be a whole other discussion. Just like talking about those state institutions and like the systems around them.
I lived in one for 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a private room. But I could be on the wards.
Yeah, there was that much work to do.
Yes.
Yeah. The one I visited in Texas was a 1,500 bed facility. It was like unreal. It's a mini town. Like they had their own church, their own dining halls.
Oh yeah.
Places you go to eat. Like it's their own place to go fishing. Like it was a fully functional community within gates.
Yep.
Their own hospital. Like everything. I think it was a 200. There's like a 200 bed hospital or something like that. It's unreal how big these things are.
Wow. Oh,
cool.
Unbelievable.
Well, on that like moderately sad note.
Well, at least we're doing good work now.
Yes, we are. Yeah, we're doing much better. Vicki, thank you for sharing some on this. And if you got any other like things like when it comes to the webinars or whatever that you're announcing, make sure you kick them into that group.
Okay.
Cool. I appreciate y'all's time. Anyone do anything fun this weekend?